You are listening to The Evidence Locker. Our cases have been researched using open source and archive materials. It deals with true crimes and real people. Each episode is produced with the utmost respect to the victims, their families, and loved ones. It was October 2000 in Christchurch, New Zealand. The local coroner was faced with an unusual case. He had to examine the body of a 32-year-old Australian scientist who had passed away while working at the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory in the South Pole. Christchurch is the gateway to the Antarctic, and many scientists and researchers use the New Zealand city as the last outpost before venturing to the White Continent. Rodney Marks had died of natural causes at the Amundsen Scott Medical Facility 6 months before. Because of bad weather conditions, the scientist's body was placed in the snow, where it was to be preserved until transport could be sent at the end of the polar winter. The Amundsen Scott Research Station, where Rodney was based, is one of the most isolated places on Earth. It is run by the National Science Foundation of the United States, or NSF. However, the base is situated in the Ross Dependency Territory, an area claimed by New Zealand. So Rodney's case made for the dirty jurisdictional tug-of-war, an Australian citizen working at an American base in New Zealand territory. In the end, Australia and the U.S. agreed that Rodney's body could be transported to New Zealand. The post-mortem examination was routine procedure because of Rodney's young age. His family and friends were still coming to terms with his sudden death, and any answers about what happened to him would help them in getting closure. 6 weeks after Rodney Marks' body arrived in New Zealand, the autopsy results were finally released. The cause of death was methanol poisoning. He had the equivalent of a full wine glass of the substance in his system. Rodney did not die of natural causes after all. It had been more than 50 years since the last murder in the Antarctic, but this case was far more complicated. The implication was that Rodney Marks was poisoned by one of the 49 other people doing a winter over at the Amundsen Scott base. This sent a shockwave through the international science community. Who would want to kill this easygoing, likable Australian astrophysicist? Rodney David Marks was born in March 1968 in Geelong, a coastal city southwest of Melbourne in Australia. He was bright and enthusiastic, and from a young age it was obvious that Rodney had an aptitude for science. He received a scholarship at a prestigious private school in his hometown. But this promising young man did not let his life waste away behind the books. He loved surfing on the south coast of Geelong. To friends and family, it seemed like he was always in the water. When he wasn't, he loved watching Australian football, or AFL, as much as any other person living in the state of Victoria. Rodney was a goth who enjoyed playing music. He was in an alternative rock band and belted out cover hits whenever they had a chance to meet up or perform. He also started playing chess and poker. He was the one to beat at both games, as he was an excellent player. And even if he'd had a couple of drinks, nobody could beat him. But he wouldn't boast about it. In his laid-back way, it was just a part of who he was. Rodney's solution to any problem was to go to the pub and have a couple drinks. Rodney was known to be brilliant and witty, and his dry sense of humor made him very likable. After high school, he finished his degree in science at the University of Melbourne. Then his studies took him north to the harbour city of Sydney, where he completed his PhD at the University of New South Wales. For his doctoral thesis, he chose a topic that interested him greatly: the characterization of the South Pole site for astrophysical observations. Rodney Marks soon became a well-known name in the international science community and made many friends and connections along the way. As a part of his academic journey, he spent time in Boulder, Colorado, as well as Nice in the south of France. Because of his stint in France, he could speak French fluently, just another skill he'd acquired casually without making too much of a fuss about it. But the lure of the South Pole always pulled Rodney. That would be his ultimate working environment. Rodney specialized in radio astronomy, capturing radio waves transmitted by objects in space. Radio astronomy allows scientists to observe objects in space that cannot be seen by using optical astronomy. Because radio waves cut through the dust in our galaxy, which allows scientists to detect other galaxies beyond our own, galaxies which are impossible to observe in any other way. Winters in the South Pole provide optimal conditions for these telescopes used in capturing radio waves, and the colder, the better. When the opportunity came for Rodney to go to the Antarctic in 1994, nothing would stop him from going. It was only a 2-week stint for research purposes, but it wasn't enough, not by a long shot. In 1997, Rodney reported for duty for his first winter over in Antarctica, an experience he enjoyed so much he signed up again just 2 years later. Antarctica is an enormous place, a vast white void in the perception of many people. Due to its extreme climate, nobody actually lives there. That is, apart from scientists and support staff from all over the world who were sent temporarily to conduct research. In the 1950s, in the Cold War race for scientific superiority, the United States built a permanent base at the South Pole. Operation Deep Freeze was launched. It was a collaboration between 40 countries to further Earth science studies and to create a larger knowledge about the least explored area on the planet. Many missions followed, and to this day, there is a constant presence of scientists scattered across the Antarctic, with bases run by various countries. All lines of longitude converge, which means that all time zones converge. The sun rises once a year, and it sets once a year. 6 months of perpetual night follows, and temperatures drop to as low as negative 110 degrees Fahrenheit, or negative 80 degrees Celsius. As a matter of practicality, watches are set to New Zealand time, which is UTC plus 12. People who work in the South Pole are either scientists or part of the maintenance crew. A maintenance worker's job is demanding, and they have to be resourceful and use what's available to do repairs and maintain scientific equipment. Midwinter's Day is an annual celebration and is marked by taking a photo of all the winter over polies, as they celebrate the fact that there is only 3 months to go until they would see the sun again. After taking the photo, which is no small feat in sub-zero temperatures, the party begins. Well, another party, because in reality, with limited sources of entertainment, drinking is somewhat of a sport at research bases throughout the South Pole. When the first polar bases were built, the population who would winter over were mainly male. But since women have been added to the list, sex has become another great pastime. It is rumored that some guys take an ice wife for the season. There is a strong sense of camaraderie between crew members, and there are jokes and traditions that are passed on from one winter to the next. Like the whiner bell, for instance. This is a bell in the dining room which cooks ring when somebody complains about the food. When the bell rings, the dining room erupts in a banter of boos and hisses. People who stay behind for the winter have to go through an array of physical and psychological tests. These tests are similar to tests taken by astronauts before they are allowed to travel into space. Pre-existing health conditions that could cause issues while living in isolation, like heart disease or diabetes, would disqualify the applicant. Then there are the psychological tests. The isolation and 6 months of no sunshine can cause something known as seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, which is a form of depression. By the end of the season, everyone is somewhat affected by the elements, but having a predisposition to depression would prevent applicants from receiving the all clear. Rodney Marks made it through the evaluations. It counted in his favor that he already spent a winter in the Antarctic. His only health concern was a mild case of Tourette's syndrome. His tics came out as mild twitching or a deep sniff from time to time, but that was all. It was not enough to cause a concern. In fact, most people who knew Rodney was unaware of the fact that he had been diagnosed with Tourette's. Rodney found alcohol masked his condition, and he was known to be a heavy drinker. Like so many explorers, adventurers, and scientists before him, Rodney touched down at the U.S. research base, McMurdo Station, the only place resembling a town in Antarctica. Some people have commented on the fact that McMurdo reminds them of a small town in Arctic Alaska. It is an 8-hour flight from New Zealand and serves as the gateway to the rest of the continent. The Amundsen Scott Research Station is located 1,000 miles inland from McMurdo, making it the most isolated place on Earth. It was named after the first two explorers to reach the South Pole in 1911 and 1912, respectively. Rodney's room for the summer and winter was in a place called the Dome. Inside the 18,000 square foot, or 1,670 square meter, geodesic structure were 3 two-story buildings that were the living quarters for everybody on the base. As winter was closing in, Rodney fell in love with maintenance specialist Sonya Volter. Her contract ran out at the end of summer, but they realized that their relationship was something that they had wanted to explore. Sonya applied for a winter position. Her application was approved a week before she was supposed to leave. Rodney and Sonya were more or less the same age, and she played the bass with him in the station's band, Fanny Pack and the Big Nancy Boys. Rodney dyed his hair purple, and Sonya dyed hers green. They were energetic and fun to be around. Their co-workers all felt that this was more than just a romance of convenience, and by all accounts, Rodney and Sonya were a perfect match. The couple was part of the 250 people working at the base over the summer. By winter, the number was significantly less. Of the 50 people who stayed behind, only 10 were scientists. The rest were maintenance and management crew employed by Raytheon Polar Services. As the sun set for the last time in March of 2000, the last plane for the summer left the Amundsen Scott Station. There was no way in or out of the base until October. 50 people locked up for 8 months in extreme surroundings. No wonder the chosen few have to undergo as many tests and interviews as they do. A Polly is a special kind of person. It is somebody with enough social skills to fit into a working team, but antisocial enough not to miss the outside world. Loners with a high level of competence, but also a strong sense of empathy and tolerance towards others. Psychologists have been involved in preparing and debriefing Polies since the 1950s, after a construction worker had developed schizophrenia. He was sedated for most of the winter, hibernating his way through his condition in a makeshift padded cell until he could leave. Around this time, NASA was pouring a lot of resources into space travel. They used reports regarding the South Pole winter crew to prepare for extended space expeditions. Despite the extensive library of books and films at the research station, the favorite pastime in the winter of 2000 was drinking. Sonya Volter wrote in her blog, "There is an unbelievable amount of alcohol down here. Pallets of booze were flown in. I can't tell you how many cases of beer, booze, and wine I caught and passed on to the next person. Well, yes, I also shuttled sodas and fresh food, but there seemed to be mostly alcohol. I'm not aware of any AA meetings taking place, although it wouldn't be a bad idea for quite a few people here." Alcohol was available for free to all employees. Despite this, the Dome had its own moonshine still that ran from one season to the next. Rodney Marks had the habit of taking liquor into his room. Co-workers suspected a level of alcoholism, but it wasn't out of control. He was a young, jovial person who took pride in the fact that he could drink his friends under the table. But yet the next day, he'd be back on the job, a job that he excelled at. In that winter, the Antarctic Submillimeter Telescope and Remote Observatory, or ASTRO, had some of the most successful seasons ever. Rodney ran the observatory, collected data, and always looked for better ways of working. His morning commute was extreme. To get to the building where the telescope was, he had to walk half a mile, 1 kilometer, to an area called the dark sector. After the day was done, he geared up in his Arctic suit and made his way back to the dome. This was his routine: work hard, commute hard, and party hard. In the second month of winter, the telescope had some problems, and Rodney was in the process of repairing it. He sent regular reports to his supervisors and colleagues at Harvard, and always kept a positive tone in his correspondence. An email he sent in the summer read, "Hi again from the sunny south, where today we have a pleasant and windless negative 38 degrees Celsius. Still too cold to hang around outside for long, but nevertheless it has a summery feel to it." Rodney loved his job and felt grateful to be in the South Pole where it was all happening. But unfortunately for Rodney, his days were numbered. On Thursday, the 11th of May, as he was walking back to the dome after work, he experienced trouble breathing. As he arrived at his room, he told Sonya that he was not feeling well at all. Sonya suggested he ate something, and the couple went to the galley around 6:30 for their dinner. Rodney ate very little and had a can of beer with his meal. After dinner, they would usually go to the bar, but not that night. Rodney complained that his vision had gone blurry, and he went to bed early, which was unusual for him. Sonya went to bed with him and settled in for a restless night. Rodney felt uncomfortable and woke up several times. At one point, he took antacid tablets as he had a burning sensation in his stomach. At 5:30 a.m., he woke up and vomited blood. They both knew that whatever was wrong, it was serious. Sonya took Rodney to Biomed, the station's medical facility. He was wearing sunglasses as his eyes were extremely sensitive. The base doctor in the winter of 2000 was 40-year-old Dr. Robert Thompson. Rodney had strange symptoms, and the doctor didn't quite know what to make of them. His first guess was that his patient was experiencing alcohol withdrawal symptoms, as he hadn't had his usual amount of alcohol in the 38 hours leading up to his visit to the doctor. He suggested Rodney return to his room and sleep it off. Rodney and Sonya went back to his quarters, but he could not sleep. As the day went by, his condition got worse. So Rodney decided to go back to Biomed, stumbling through the dingy tunnel between the buildings. Dr. Thompson examined him again, but still had no idea what could be wrong. Biomed was a basic medical facility, much like a one-bed emergency room in rural areas of first-world countries. The base doctor could take x-rays and do simple lab tests. To try and figure out what was wrong with Rodney, the doctor decided to draw blood for testing. That is when he noticed 2 needle marks on Rodney's right arm. He found this peculiar, as there were no recreational drugs permitted at Amundsen Scott. Also, Rodney was right-handed, so the chances of him having injected himself were slim. But this wasn't the time to confront Rodney. He was agitated and feverish. After the blood was taken, Rodney returned to his room. Sonya said that she wanted him to rest, but that he wasn't able to lie still and that he was breathing heavily. At 3 p.m., they were desperate and went to Biomed one last time. Rodney was in a bad state, and Dr. Thompson was running out of answers. The doctor contacted support via satellite, but nobody had any advice. There was an ectochem machine at Biomed that could give blood test results within minutes, but it was not calibrated and could not be used. To calibrate it would have taken 9 hours. and by the looks of Rodney Marks, they were running out of time. The young and talented astrophysicist said that he was hurting all over. His breathing was heavy and rapid, and he became combative. Dr. Thompson had to calm him down and gave him a strong antipsychotic called Haldol. Rodney lay down and looked like he was falling asleep. He was clearly in pain as he made quiet moaning noises every time he took a breath. Sonya held his hand. Then, as she would later recall, "I thought he was getting better. His pupils were huge. They got smaller. He squeezed my hand. He tried to sit up. He then quit breathing, and we tried CPR." Alarms sounded across the base, and all staff trained in emergency respiration made their way to Biomed. They tried to revive Rodney for 45 minutes, but it was too late. Their 33-year-old coworker and friend was dead. He had suffered cardiac arrest and was pronounced dead just before 6 p.m. Everyone on the base and their coworkers around the world were shocked. A memorial service was held at Amundsen Scott Station the day after Rodney's death on Saturday evening, May 13th. The question on everyone's minds was, how could such a brilliant, vibrant person be taken in the prime of his life? Nobody suspected foul play. Rodney's death was just a terrible, tragic story. The assumption at this point was that he had died of natural causes. The official statement by Harvard University said, "There is nothing to suggest that his death was related to his work, to the environment at the South Pole, or to any toxic or infectious agent." Back in Australia, Rodney's family held a memorial service 1 week after his untimely death. The place they chose for the service was in Torquay, at a spot overlooking the town and the beaches. Before a post-mortem examination could be performed, they had to wait for the first planes to arrive at the end of October. That is 6 months later. In the meantime, all his loved ones could do was mourn a son, brother, friend, fiancé, and co-worker, and hope that they would have answers by the end of this nightmare. Dave Pernick, an engineer working at the Center for Astrophysical Research in Antarctica, or CARA at the time, remembered the days following Rodney's death. They put him on a sled and stashed him in an arch, kind of out of sight, as to not spook anyone that might work in there doing rounds and such. Some of us were thinking about a week later that this was wholly unsatisfactory and was not treating our friend with the proper respect. After all, he came here to study the sky. At least he could be put to rest under the aurora and stars. Let's build him a casket and bury him out at the pole for the rest of the winter. His friends made him a casket of oak, pieces of which were found around the base. It was decorated with a brass inlay of Scorpio, which was Rodney's favorite constellation. Everyone helped, and it took about a month to complete it. When the casket was ready, they retrieved his body and placed it inside. With the help of a traditional Nansen sled, the crew pulled it out to the geographic South Pole, where he could rest until it was time to go home. This occasion did not go by without ceremony, and as Dave Pernick remembers, at the pole we placed him into the ice grave with a great deal of cooperation and teamwork. 2 people spoke, simple and elegant and definitely cool. Rodney would think so. The crew kept their heads down and managed to make it through the winter. Sonya stayed on in the room that she shared with Rodney till the end of the season. In the midwinter's greeting card, a prominent note stating, "In memory of Rodney Marks," is written below the list of names. On all the base lists, Rodney's name is included. It seemed to be one of the longest winters. The isolation of the base is amplified at a time of crisis. The year before, base Dr. Jerry Nielsen found a lump in her breast and treated herself for cancer before she could be flown out. The rescue planes also brought a replacement, Dr. Thompson. In late October, preparations to take Rodney's body to New Zealand had begun. He was taken from Amundsen Scott Station to McMurdo Station, from where he was transported to Christchurch in New Zealand. When his body was taken to McMurdo, an Australian flag was all that remained at the South Pole to mark the tragedy. Darren Schneider, also an astrophysicist, made sure it stayed behind, permanently marking Rodney's resting place. Since then, each time Darren returns to Amundsen Scott, he replaces the weather-ravaged flag with a new one. On October 30th, Sonya and Darren Schneider also boarded the plane which landed in Christchurch late in the evening. Back in civilization, and back to the reality of the void that was left by Rodney's passing, they met up with Rodney's mother, Ray, and his two sisters at Bailey's, a local bar where Polies like to hang out. The get-together turned into a sort of wake, as everyone toasted and remembered a remarkable man. It would be 6 weeks before they learned that Rodney's death was no accident, that he had been poisoned. At Amundsen Scott Station, methanol was used to clean telescope lenses and other instruments. Not suspecting foul play, his co-workers tidied up his office, and Sonya packed away his personal belongings in the room that they shared. A lot of potential evidence was thrown out. New Zealand police officer, Detective Senior Sergeant, or DSS Grant Wormald, was tasked with investigating the case. When he opened the investigation, all 49 people living at the Amundsen Scott Station at the time of Rodney's death had gone their separate ways. They were scattered all over the world. If Rodney was murdered, the perpetrator must have been one of the people living at the base that winter. DSS Wormald had to look at the bigger picture to understand criminal activity in the Antarctic. With excessive drinking, bar fights popped up sporadically, but being involved in an altercation could lead to termination of a contract, and the chances of ever working at the South Pole again would be slim. Finn Rohn, a Norwegian leader of a private American winter expedition to Stonington Island in 1940, came close to being the first man to be killed in the Antarctic. The group's doctor was brimming over with frustration at Finn's strict approach to discipline and nearly pushed him off a cliff. Dr. Don McLean was interviewed after the expedition and recalled an incident when the two of them were inspecting birds' nests. "I never came so close to killing anybody in my life." In 1984, this time, another doctor based at an Argentinian station received the news that he had to stay for the following winter. He burned the station down. Nobody was killed, but the whole crew had to be evacuated. In 1996, a U.S. cook stationed at McMurdo attacked another cook with the claw end of a hammer in a work situation. He was detained in a hut until FBI agents arrived to investigate. The stress caused by living in isolation and extreme weather conditions does take its toll on people spending winter in the South Pole. But deaths weren't commonplace at all. Rodney's death was only the fourth death on the continent in 35 years. The first incident occurred at Russia's Vostok station, when a scientist snapped after losing a game of chess and murdered his opponent with an axe. After this, playing chess was forbidden at Russian Antarctic stations, which is a big deal, as chess was as important a distraction in those tedious conditions to Russian scientists as vodka would have been. The subsequent deaths were all related to accidents, with one at McMurdo in January 2000, the same year Rodney was at the South Pole. A Canadian crew member died at McMurdo after a blood clot traveled to his lungs from a broken leg. New Zealand DSS Grant Wormald had to keep an open mind in the death of Rodney Marks. For a brief moment, he had to consider the possibility of suicide. Winters were long, and the pressure was high. But this theory was quickly cast aside. Rodney loved his job. It was exactly where he wanted to be. The fact that Sonya was there with him made him less lonely and homesick. He was looking forward to their future together. Also, his supervisor, Harvard professor Anthony Stark, who communicated with Rodney daily, did not think if Rodney had wanted to end his life, he would have chosen methanol. As a scientist, he would have known that it would be an excruciatingly painful death. Drinking a lethal dose of methanol by accident while working in a lab would be virtually impossible. The fact that Rodney repeatedly sought medical help on the day of his death further debunks the suicide theory. The second theory was that methanol was used in the station's moonlight still, which caused Rodney's death. But this idea didn't pan out either, as nobody else had any symptoms after drinking the homemade brew. Another possibility was that Rodney ingested methanol without knowing. Perhaps someone had deliberately put the poison into his food or drink. DSS Wormald remarked, "This could have been in the form of a prank or done with a more sinister intention." Rodney's friend Darren Schneider's diary inscription for the week that Rodney passed away wrote, "Rodney's dry wit was sometimes misinterpreted here by the people not used to it. This is where his considerate nature and his kindness would come out. I saw him numerous times make amends in a very nice way for these misunderstandings. He would also say or do something kind for someone having a hard time in general." Did Rodney unintentionally cross a line with another Polly at the station? Was it possible that in joking with someone, he had offended them enough that they would want him dead? New Zealand police reached out to the U.S. National Science Foundation, who run the Amundsen Scott Station. But the NSF did not want to cooperate. Were they trying to keep the fact that the most prestigious students spent 6 months of a year working hard and drinking even harder under wraps? DSS Wormald asked for reports by the NSF into Rodney's death and reports into the Ectochem medical computer. He was told that there were no relevant reports. When Wormald persisted and asked if they had conducted any investigation at all, the NSF said one inquiry was carried out, but because it was of a medical nature would be, quote, "of little value to your inquiry," unquote. Paul Marks, Rodney's father, was frustrated at the lack of cooperation. He told Science magazine, "If it had been one of yours, a U.S. citizen, I can't believe that the FBI wouldn't have been involved from the start and that no stonewalling would have occurred." Over the next 4 years, Wormald carried on with his own investigation as the NSF and Raytheon drip-fed him information, including the fact that the moonshine, distilled at the Amundsen Scott Station, tested negative for methanol. It took him 6 years of persuading and begging before the NSF would give him access to the 49 people that did a winter over with Rodney Marks in 2000. Wormald was to give them a questionnaire for pre-approval that they passed on to their employees. Of the 49 people, only 13 responded. Some of the more crucial witnesses never replied. DSS Wormald was convinced the lack of response is not due to disregard for the investigation. He believed that the pressure from the NSF of losing future employment was too great. The most telling evidence came to light after 2 former NSF staff members came forward. The first was Dr. William Silva, who was the base doctor at a nearby station in 2000. He shed some light as to the medical inquiry conducted by the NSF. Dr. Silver was one of the experts who had to review Dr. Thompson's notes regarding Rodney's death. He felt that Dr. Thompson's actions on the day were questionable. The second witness to help DSS Wormald was a health and safety officer for the Antarctic program who worked for the NSF in Christchurch. He gave a sworn affidavit that there had been a number of inquiries conducted by the NSF into the circumstances of Rodney's death. The witness said that lab containers were tested to see if the contents matched the labels. Tests were also done to see if any of the bottles of alcohol Rodney had access to had methanol in it. A curious fact, there was an unusual bottle of alcohol that Rodney had bought during a repose in New Zealand. Rodney's friend Darren Schneider remembered this bottle. It was found behind Rodney's computer after his death. He remembered a black and white label with a picture of a shrimp in writing he could not understand. He guessed it to be Portuguese. Darren believes this bottle was thrown out when they cleaned up Rodney's desk after his death, not realizing that it could be a vital piece of evidence. One Polly, who wanted to remain anonymous, said that as soon as he heard that Rodney had been poisoned, he thought of the strange bottle on his desk. You only have to Google alcohol spiked with methanol to see countless articles of travelers who had drunk cheaper or fake varieties of alcohol, which caused severe illness, or in some cases, even death. seems to be a popular trend in poorer countries with a high influx of tourists, like Bali, Mexico, or coastal resorts in Eastern Europe. Just a small amount can leave you blind and cause permanent damage to your kidneys and other organs. Bars use local moonshine to fill up bottles with well-known labels. Especially clear spirits like vodka, gin, or tequila are easily replicated. And the customers are none the wiser. Perhaps Rodney's sketchy bottle of booze contained a lethal amount of methanol that cost him his life. Did Rodney take a swig from this bottle in an effort to warm up before making his way back to the dome through the snow? Symptoms of methanol poisoning include blurred vision, stomach pain, and difficulty to breathe. Multiple witnesses saw Rodney fade away while experiencing all of these symptoms. If the Ectochem machine was working that day, it would have revealed an abnormal gap in Rodney's blood, only caused by a handful of agents, including methanol. If only Dr. Thompson had realized, it would have been easy to reverse the effects of the poison by running a mixture of ethanol and saline through his body. Dr. Thompson received a lot of criticism about his actions on that dark day in May at Amundsen Scott Station. Also the fact that he did not follow up on the needle marks on Rodney's right arm. Why would he inject him without asking if Rodney had injected himself with anything? His stint in the Antarctic came to an end a year later when he had to be airlifted due to a back injury. He had slipped on the ice-covered steps outside Biomed. Dr. Thompson's whereabouts have been unknown since 2006, and DSS Wormald has not been able to get a statement from him regarding the Australian astrophysicist's death. But no amount of what-ifs or should-have-dones will ever bring Rodney Marks back. In September 2008, the written report resulting from the December 2006 inquest was released. The coroner could not find evidence to support theories of a prank gone awry, nor foul play, nor suicide. He concluded that Rodney ingested the methanol 2 days prior to his death on May 10th. The source of the methanol was never determined, and the U.S. companies did little to help solve the mystery. Paul Marks publicly thanked the New Zealand police. He said that they faced an arduous task of dealing with people that quite obviously don't want to deal with them. Sadly, Rodney's family and friends had to come to terms with the fact that they will never have any more information regarding his death. His father also said, "I don't think we are going to try to find out any more in regards to how Rodney died. I see that as a fruitless exercise." The memory of Rodney Marks has been imprinted into history with the broad, ice-covered mountain and the Worcester Range in the Antarctic bearing his name, Mount Marks. At the foot of the mountain, there is a plaque commemorating him. In 2001, the annual marker for the ever-shifting geographic South Pole was made by his friends Dave Pernick and Mike Boyce, a sculpted scorpion overlying the continent of Antarctica with the words, "Not without peril." And of course, there's Darren Schneider's Australian flag. And in Darren's view, the NSF hates it and continually fights to get rid of it. I guess they don't want there to be a reminder of the incident, but I want that flag there. And Rodney's family likes the fact that that point in the ice is marked. The fact that the flag moves farther away from the base each year as the ice moves is a very graphic reminder of the passage of time since this terrible event in our lives. At some point, it might die, but the ephemeral nature of it makes it a powerful memorial. If you'd like to read more about this case, have a look at the resources used for this episode in the show notes. Also visit and like our Facebook page at facebook.com/Evidence Locker Podcast to see more about today's case. If you like our podcast, please subscribe on Apple Podcast or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcasts. We would also appreciate if you could review the episodes, as it gives us some street cred in the world of podcasting. While you're waiting for our next episode, why not listen to one of our podcasting friends?
This is Mike Morford. You may know me as co-host of the true crime podcast Criminology. I'd like to invite you to listen to my new podcast, The Murder in My Family, which is out right now. In each episode, I discuss a murder case and include an interview with a family member of the victim to discuss the aftermath of the murder. Some of the cases I cover are well known, and others you probably haven't heard of. And I have several episodes currently available for you to binge on, including episodes about the Delphi murders, the Golden State Killer, and the Colonial Parkway murders, just to name a few. Here's a small sample. Bill Thomas is the brother of Kathy Thomas, and he agreed to talk with me about the murder in his family.
Well, Mike, at the risk of sounding like every other proud big brother around the world, Kathy was an amazing person.
And one thing I wanted to get across is how important it is that the victims that I'll be talking about in these cases aren't just statistics. You know, they were real people. They're more than just murder victims.
For me, knowing that he has a family and that he gets to see his kids every day and that he gets to be there for his kids growing up, like, it's not fair. He was the most funniest man I've ever met. He was everybody's friend.
New episodes come out on Saturdays, and you can find The Murder in My Family wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe today so you don't miss an episode.
Hi, I'm Michael, host of the Murder Mile True Crime Podcast, which was nominated as one of the best British true crime podcasts of 2018, is based on my 5-star rated guided walk, and features more than 300 untold, unsolved, and long-forgotten murders, all set within 1 square mile of London's West End. So if you love hearing about new cases for the first time, old cases through a fresh pair of ears, and classic cases with a twist, all researched using the original declassified police investigation files, written using first-hand accounts, and recorded using authentic sounds from the murder location itself, then Murder Mile is just for you. Download the Murder Mile True Crime Podcast on iTunes, Acast, or your favourite podcast platform every Thursday. Thank you for listening, and stay safe.
This was the Evidence Locker. Thank you for listening.